Today's reading from Rays of the One Light, which are weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, is on week 23. Why do devotees fall? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. An endlessly fascinating question is, why did Judas fall after receiving the extraordinary blessing of being accepted into the inner circle of Jesus Christ's disciples? For Judas was one of the 12 apostles, yet he betrayed Jesus and earned for himself the opprobrium of Christendom for all futurity for his sin. We find Judas reprimanding Jesus just days before that betrayal. Jesus, aware that his disciples would soon be facing with his death the supreme tragedy of their lives, allowed Mary to express her devotion by anointing his feet with costly ointment. This act of wanton waste, as Judas saw it, awakened indignation in that disciple. Why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? This, he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and kept the purse and bare what was put therein. Then said Jesus, let her alone. Against the day of my burying hath she kept this. For the poor always ye have with you, but me ye have not always. Doubt not the power of delusion. Respect it, indeed, fear it, though not in the sense of cowering before it. For, as Yoganandas said, one is not safe until he attains nirvikalpa samadhi, the state of final union with God. Judas, through attachment to money, opened his consciousness to subtle influences, which may be called satanic, that drew his thoughts toward other related attitudes. The importance of worldly power, for instance, and of worldly influence. The Bhagavad Gita gives a graphic explanation of how easily the mind can be drawn downward once it begins to feed on wrong attitudes. In the second chapter, Sri Krishna states, if one ponders on sense objects, there springs up attraction to them. From attraction grows desire. Desire, impatient for fulfillment, flames to anger. From anger there arises infatuation, the delusion that one object alone is worth clinging to the exclusion of all others. From infatuation ensues forgetfulness of the higher self. From forgetfulness of the self follows degeneration of the discriminative faculty. And when discrimination is lost, there follows the annihilation of one's spiritual life. At the first thought of delusion, Paramahansa Yogananda said, that is the time to stop it. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Good morning, everyone. Again. My name is Dharmaraj, and my wife Dharmini and I are the spiritual directors of Ananda, LA. She sends her regrets. She's not feeling well this morning, and she wasn't able to join us. I wanted to begin by reading from Whispers from Eternity. This is a book of prayer poems by Paramahansa Yogananda. This one is, I want to feel thee just behind the voice of my prayer. O Father, thou art just behind my vision with which I see thy beauty without. Thou art just behind my listening power with which I hear thy voice in all creation. Thou art just behind my touch with which I feel thy world. In the sweetness of flowers and in the zest of sustaining food lies hidden the essence of thy being, thine eternal sweetness. Thou art just behind the voice of my prayer. Thou art just behind the mind with which I pray. Thou art just behind my glistening feelings. Thou art just behind my thoughts. Thou art just behind my cravings for thee. Thou art just behind my meditations. Thou art just behind the veils of nature's splendors. Thou art just behind the screen of my love. Behind all these mystic screens, reveal thyself as thou art. This week's topic is, why do devotees fall? And it goes in conjunction with next week's topic, how devotees rise. So it's kind of like there's bad news and good news. We're going to hear the bad news first. No, actually it's all good news, because as it said in the introspection affirmation, when we discover a fault, we should react with gratitude. As Swami Kriyananda once said, when you find a fault, don't shrink. Be glad that you've seen it. It's been there all the time. But once we see it, then we can work on it. And, I mean, if our shoelace is untied and someone says your shoelace is untied, you don't, I'm so, or, no, it's not. Your shoelace is untied. We just go, oh, thanks. Done. And so the next time some big ugly thing gets pointed in your face and you think, yeah, that actually might be accurate, now that I come to admit it, just say, it's a shoelace. Tie it. Enough. Because when we get into all of the contortions, at least speaking personally, it just amplifies everything. And it can also paralyze our will. Oh, I can't believe I left my shoelace untied once again. I keep trying, and I thought I got over this already, and now it's up again. I feel like I haven't made any progress at all. And that's what we walk around. What's the matter? Why are you lashing yourself with the cat o' nine tails? Shoelace? Yeah. See how ridiculous that is? And it's all that ridiculous. Because we end up concentrating too much on ourselves instead of on the goal, instead of on God, instead of on awakening our higher self within. I wanted to talk about the story of Judas a little more because I never really understood or could relate to the story of Judas until I learned Yogananda's explanation of it. Right there, it says, Judas said, why was not this ointment sold in the market for 300 pence and given to the poor? Not because he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief. It's like, huh? How was he a thief and one of the 12 apostles? I mean, couldn't Jesus tell that he was a thief? Wouldn't he have not let him in? Wouldn't they all have noticed, hey, there's a thief here? I mean, what about all the other thieves who wanted to be apostles? I mean, it's just like, it doesn't make any sense that he was a thief. Now, that he was attached to money, sure, but not a thief. It just, and Kriyananda asked Yogananda directly, was Judas a great soul? And Yogananda said yes. He said he would have had to have been to be one of the 12. Just makes sense. So, what happened? We know from the story of the Bible that Judas was from a more socially elevated class or position among all the 12. He was sort of the most noble and also the most attached to being in the ruling class and all of that. And he was constantly criticizing Jesus about, why can't you act kind of more, impressive? And why do you always have to be hanging out with the poor people and the sick people and the lepers? And, they're fine, but There's other people too, why don't you come to this party over in Hollywood or whatever it is, And then it came down to, okay, Judas betrayed Jesus and earned this opprobrium, that this ignominy for all futurity, that it was Judas who betrayed the master, it was Judas who got Jesus killed, and so on. And so even to say to someone, you are a Judas is like, it's this horrible condemnation. And in a way, rightly so, and yet, if Judas was so bad and so one-dimensionally evil and black-hearted, then after he betrayed Jesus, why did he kill himself? Why didn't he just say, okay, my treacherous work is done, and now I can talk to Annas and Caiaphas and all the others and maybe hang out with them? And he was not at all pleased or proud or anything. He killed himself. In fact, Yogananda said he shouldn't have. He said his treachery was perhaps the greatest in history, and yet he should have gone to the mountains and meditated and prayed for forgiveness and purification. And so that's another point on this whole road. If we find ourselves going down the wrong road or find that we're at the end of the wrong road somehow that we didn't realize we got on, even Judas should have only meditated and prayed and asked for not even forgiveness. Yes, certainly forgiveness, but that still has the sense of condemnation. Just purification. Whoops, I blew it big time. Can you help me get back up on my feet? So I'm sure none of us has done anything like near what Judas did. As Yogananda said, I don't think in this crowd there is a single gangster. And so, going back now to Judas's story, he killed himself. He obviously was overwrought with regret. So why? I mean, didn't he know what was going to happen? Didn't he know what he was doing? On some level, no, because why would he have been overcome with regret? So what Yogananda explained was that Judas was also saying to Jesus, you need to show these people that you are going to be the king of Israel. You are going to be the new king. You need to reveal your power. And Jesus obviously didn't. So Judas thought, well, I know how I can make this work. What I'll do is, I will tell the Pharisees, the priests, the Roman guards, all of this, where Jesus is, so that they can come and arrest him. And when they do arrest him, then he will reveal his powers. And in forcing this confrontation, I will show them all who he really is. And then we can get this show on the road. So he did so. And, he dipped his bread with Jesus, and Jesus said, go and do what you have to do, and so on. And what happened? They all came, and you can imagine Judas, like, okay, here we go. He knew that Jesus could just dismiss them with a flick of his hand. And Jesus surrendered, which was the one thing Judas never expected him to do. And thus, he was horrified. And that's the end of the story, as I already covered. So, how did it all start? Why did Judas get into this whole wrong road? Well, the first thing we know, attachment to money, which doesn't mean necessarily money is evil or attachment to money is the worst sin. It's just attachment to something over God, over loving God, was the problem. And then it's hinted at. There's this one little phrase in the reading that Rose just read. It says, we find just days before the crucifixion, Judas criticizing Jesus. In Hindi, we say bas, meaning enough. Italian, basta, like, that's it. Judas criticizing Jesus. That's how it starts. When we say to the spiritual teacher, or we say to our spiritual path, or to anything, I know you're really enlightened and smart and everything, but, your computer's not working, and I do have a degree in computer science, and I was trained for several years, and so in this matter, I'm slightly wiser than you are. And we may laugh, or we may go, because it resonates, I can give you a few examples of that. One was when Swami Kriyananda, actually there was a 12-year-long lawsuit between SRF and Ananda, SRF suing Ananda. At the beginning of the lawsuit, it was over the copyrights to Yogananda's name and picture and all that. And if we had lost the lawsuit, well, we wouldn't even be allowed to have this picture here. And so at the beginning of the lawsuit, Swami Kriyananda said, this is about the copyrights to my books. And people said, huh? Sir? The copyrights to your books? I mean, it's about the copyrights to Yogananda's picture and his books. I mean, they're not talking about your books. Are you feeling okay? And he didn't say anything. And 12 years later, when there was actually 2 lawsuits, when the second lawsuit was settling, they said, the only way that you can rectify the situation is by signing over your copyrights to us. 12 years later. But he saw it then. But because the others couldn't see it and didn't see it, they thought, not all others, but a few others, and I probably would have been among them if I had been there, said they didn't see it. So they said, well, you're not seeing what I'm seeing, so you must be wrong. And Swami Kriyananda said of Yogananda in his new biography of Yogananda, that any time I found him not matching my standard of perfection or my expectation of perfection, it was because he had so far exceeded it. But I didn't know it at the time. I myself was working in India and was working in a department, and someone came to me and said, well, Swami Kriyananda has asked me to work with you. And I thought, oh. And I have to admit, there was a little thought like, could we talk about this? Or I wouldn't have minded hearing about this before you spring it on me yourself, but also in my mind was, fair enough. If Swami's asked it to be done, it must be right. It seems a little, but anyway, it must be right. I will just try to find a way to relate to it. And 2 months later, I left India on vacation and never came back. And this guy took over the department. And if he hadn't come at that time, everything would have been lost. So it was much more right, much more of a solution than I ever saw. Now, all of this is still a little bit grim. Why do devotees fall? It's very important that as he said in the reading, that we respect the power of delusion. And what does that translate to? That translates to a little bit of, I think I'm seeing clearly, but I always admit for the small possibility of mental illness. I might be totally wrong. And how do you know? We have that experience when we have an argument with someone about something stupid, just like, the car is parked on Highland. No, actually, you parked on Oakwood. No, I parked on Highland. Don't you remember? No, you parked on Oakwood because it's right there. Let's go look at it. Just like, why are you getting so mad? Well, I can't believe you don't trust me. And then you open the door, you see, the car's on Oakwood. And then sorry. But all this big mess, and we were wrong. But it felt so right that I was right. And so we have to always admit for that possibility. Well, I might be wrong. On the other hand, when someone accuses you of you are this way and you are that way, sometimes you can say, no, I'm not. Or you can say, I know you are, but what am I? Or sometimes if someone is unreasonable, completely beyond, and yet if you say no, then you're fighting back, and you are also kind of defending and propping up the ego, and I say you, meaning we, meaning I, do this too. Then at the same time, we can sometimes say, maybe you're right. For 2 reasons. Maybe you're right because maybe you are right. And second reason could be, well, maybe you're right that I was like that in the last incarnation that we met at, and you're still kind of haven't gotten over it, and I don't blame you because I was pretty rotten. I'm not that way now, but fine. And in that way, you don't involve yourself in too many karmic complications of then leaving and then being like, I can't believe it. And, there was an insult that lasted 15 seconds, but there's a whole hour spent on tearing of hair and gnashing of teeth. So, even though we have to respect the power of delusion and admit that, okay, I'm 99% convinced, but 1% I'm still open to, maybe I'm wrong, or you can adjust those percentages how you feel. But still, what does it mean? Why do devotees fall? And okay, so we've talked about the why do devotees fall, and that's actually an important point. This is not why do people fall. Why do people make mistakes? Why do devotees fall? I mean, to even be interested in these teachings, to even be a devotee means you've been through a heck of a lot. I mean, to even want to come here on Sunday instead of Yogurtland and, I guess over in La Brea. I mean, there's a lot of things you could do on Sunday morning. It means you've come through a lot. So it isn't, what's the road to understanding? It's why does a devotee, someone in other words who has their eye on the goal, nevertheless still slip from time to time? And again, the answer is the power of delusion and the ego. But the point is, how far do we fall? Well, let's go back to Judas. Yoganandas said that he met Judas in this lifetime, in his lifetime. He said Judas was reincarnated in India as a disciple of Ramakrishna Paramhansa, if you know of him, Vivekananda's guru. Yogananda met him. It was after Ramakrishna's passing, I believe. But he also knew a story of him, that he was still a little attached to money. And that the other disciples used to tease him for it, like, oh, look who wants the rupees. And Ramakrishna said, don't. Leave him alone. Because he felt he has suffered enough. Yogananda added that this disciple, whose name I've forgotten his name in this life, Saravananda, thank you, Saravananda, was liberated in this lifetime. He's done. So when we think of Judas, we should think, even Judas is liberated now, free. And why do I say that? First of all, because, if you believe Yogananda as I do, certainly it's true. He is liberated. But when we say Judas, it's like, but we're thinking Judas back then. We're thinking Judas's mistake, Judas's treachery. When we think treachery, yes, we should think, I don't want to be treacherous. Yogananda said, the first law of God is loyalty, and therefore treachery is the greatest sin. He said, because mortal sins are committed in weakness. I said I wasn't going to do it, and I did it anyway. But treachery is deliberate. So Judas is no longer all those things that we think about. He's free. And why do I say that too? Because in our lives, we can think about one mistake that we did 10 years ago and think, that was my Judas moment. But that's not who we are now. And we did the best we could to make up for that. And if we haven't, then let's make up for it now. And so we are not fixed creatures. The timeline is always moving. And sometimes we make a mistake that we think is horrible, and it turns out to be actually a good thing. I will interject a completely frivolous example of this. I was playing with my cats, and this story will only make sense if you like cats, so if you don't, just pretend that you do for this moment. So the cat toy is a stick with a string and a mouse tail, one of the toy mouses with a tail tied to the end of it. And it is great fun because you can drag it all around the place, and the cats love it. The mouse is alive. They don't notice the mouse is always moving backwards, but that's okay. So you can lift it onto the bed and swing it all around, and it's so exciting. And it's been the hit toy of all the toys. And normally we rotate the toys because they get bored, but this one is just 5 stars. Always, where's the mouse? That's all we want. So I'm doing this and having a great time, and then I get it caught. I think it was behind some door, under the door or something, and I usually have been able to just pull it out, and I pulled it and broke it. Pulled the tail right off the mouse, and they were just like, and I thought, here it is, I've broken the toy. And there's this little tailless mouse now. and just this string with a stupid little black tail on the end of it. And I thought, oh. And I just kind of, in my grief, shook the stick that had just the tail on it, and they went, "What's that?" and started running all over the place because it looked like a bug now. And so the tail is more popular now than the mouse ever was. So, as I said, that was my frivolous example. So, just adding the last point of how far can we fall? The thing is, we are all going back to God. Yogananda said that explicitly, that he once said to God, "Why do you put people through so much suffering?" And God said, "I am drawing them all back to me." And Yogananda said, "What are you going to say to that?" We came from God, and we are returning back to God. So sometimes I visualize this as, being at the airport on those, moving walkways, that, we're all going towards God. The only freedom we have, really, is if we're walking on the walkway or if we are walking the opposite way on the walkway. And we can run down the walkway in the wrong direction and dive and roll and somersault and cartwheel way, but there's no end to the walkway. And so finally we kind of hit our heads on the thing and pass out, and then slowly go back to God. Of course, no example is perfect because you can't just be passive in doing all this, but still, the point is you can't go off the deep end. The soul, Yogananda said, can never be destroyed. So no matter how far we or anyone falls or makes a mistake, okay, so maybe we delayed our freedom a little bit. Maybe by an incarnation, maybe by a day. We don't know. There was a disciple of Yogananda's who fell or was being very tested, going through a difficult time, and Yogananda said, "Your karma is very complex, and if you leave me now, it will take you, 250 lifetimes, some egregious number, to get back to where you are today, right now." And unfortunately, the disciple left. But Yogananda added, after making this statement, he said, "But if you're good, it'll only take you like 3 or 4 lifetimes." So even in this ultimatum dictum, there was still, but still, if you work hard, it'll work out. Yogananda's Judas was a man named Dhirananda. I don't have time to tell the story, but it's in his new biography by Swami Kriyananda. Dhirananda he wrote The Science of Religion for Yogananda, Yogananda's first book, and he fell to the temptation of pride and actually sued Yogananda and all the newspapers in India denigrated Yogananda. It was big treachery. And still, Yogananda said he'll be free in 3 lifetimes. He said they'll be hard. The first and second will be very hard, and the third one will be difficult too, but at the end he'll find God. So, again, the divine law is always forgiving, and how do devotees fall? The operative word in that statement, why do devotees fall? The operative word is devotee. We are devotees. Be a devotee. Let's just love God. And no matter how deluded we get, mixed up we get, just say, "God, all I know is I love you, and all the rest means nothing." We'll have our offering now.
Keep calling him, keep calling him, whether he replies or not, keep calling him. In the temple of unceasing prayer, believe that he's approaching there. just know I'm praying, Lord. You know I love no other. I'll speak not, nor ask when, to expect from you an answer. You know my heart. I'll call to thee again. Keep calling him, keep calling him. Whether he replies or not, keep calling him. I'll wash thy feet of silence with the waters of my tears. The altar of my soul will be empty till thou comest. I'll wait for thee, no matter days or years. Keep calling him, keep calling him. Whether he replies or not, keep calling him. In the center of my heart, I have a mystic throne for thee. The candles of my joys are dimly burning now in hope, awaiting thy coming. Though it be eternity, keep calling him, keep calling him. Whether he replies or not, keep calling him. Even when there's no reply, never let your longing die. And call to him, keep calling him. Remain persistent, undepressed, through dark and seeming silence. If in the midst of life, disease, and death you play the dancer, yet keep